Today, it's Edwin's Monday evening property rant. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, one that is post covering finance and property news. It's a Monday evening rant, a very special event today because we're joined by Jenny Toner. Jenny, of course, is somebody that is very important because she is very much connected with conveyancing. Jenny, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Now, just give yourself a little bit of an introduction because you have a very important role at the moment.
Yeah, so my name's Jenny Tonner. I've been in the conveyancing industry for about 36 years, both in small and the largest law firms in Australia. You name it, I've done it. I left a large law firm when the GFC hit and set up my own practice, which just specialises in conveyancing. And for the last 6 years, I've been on the board of the Australian Institute of Conveyancing, New South Wales Division, and last October I was voted in as president on a platform of fixing everything that we can in relation to conveyancing and getting the protection of the consumer back front and foremost when it comes to conveyancing.
Well, this is such a really critical issue, and Edwin and I have been chatting about all of the trips and traps for the unwary through the property process. And, the transfer of property, whether you're a buyer or seller, is fraught with a lot of issues. And this is a really important conversation. Just one question. There are clearly solicitors who do conveyancing and conveyancers who do conveyancing. What's your umbrella? Does it cover both, or is it just the conveyancing people, not the solicitors? How does that work?
We don't have a full law degree. We just have qualifications and education that specialises in conveyancing. So that's why we're called conveyancers. You should be looking for a licensed conveyancer because that means they've done the education, they've done the qualification and have the required insurance. Now, we are not the same as lawyers, but when it comes to conveyancing, we do exactly the same thing, and we have the exact same requirements in terms of continuing legal education, professional indemnity insurance, all of that. We are required to do the same as a solicitor.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get into that further. But Edwin, let me bring you in now because I know that you've had a particular bee in your bonnet about this too. And you've got some very important points that you want to discuss with Jenny, and we're going to go through that now. So, Edwin, how are you doing?
Yeah, look, before we kick off, I just want to say happy Valentine's Day to both of you. Look, it's never too late to say happy Valentine's Day, and it's never too early to wish you guys a happy Lunar New Year. For tomorrow, so the festivities continue on for us. So that's my introduction. Also, look, I also want to say, not just because Jenny's on the show, Martin, but I love conveyancers. I love conveyancers in what they do, specifically what they do as they specialise in the conveyance side of the property transaction. And Look, there's a lot of arguments floating around, but over the years, I've had great relationships with conveyancers all around Sydney and Australia, for that matter, and the focus that conveyancers have on the transaction is for me is by far, if I can say it this way, Jenny, without our legal legals beating up on me, and that is in my opinion, I believe there is a greater focus to do in the transaction, the conveyance side of the transaction, from a conveyancer's point of view than from a solicitor's point of view. That's needless to say that. There are. I've met a lot of solicitors as well that perform the conveyancing aspect of a contract. But Martin, look, we cut to the chase. We cut the cloth with a sharp a two-edged sword, and that's to say that unfortunately I have had many times confrontations with our legal eagles in not being too fully focused. But then again, as I say, both sides of there are great parties on both sides. Now, given the conveyancing side of things, a huge plug there, Jenny, and and I can also say that. Martin, that Jenny did not send me a $50 bill, in a brown paper bag before the show.
Well, it's just to say that this is such a critical question. Look, I can tell you war stories of people who actually have ended up with a property with defects and stuff that they should have known and didn't know, from planning restrictions through to defects that relate to planning, it's more specifically about that extension, through to title not actually being perfected correctly, or indeed, in some cases, even stories of people having a property that they thought they owned whipped out from under them because of the way that the conveyancing was done. So there's a whole bunch of issues here. Jenny, let's come back to you. And I guess the first question we'd like to throw at you, let's start at the basics, which is, what is the role of the conveyancer, and where does your responsibility actually begin, and where does it end?
For a purchaser, we're focusing on purchasing, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It starts when we get instructions to review a contract because a client's interested in buying a property. So we'll first ask for the contract, and these days, if an agent has organised a pre-purchase building report or strata report, we'll ask for that as well. And our role is to know what to look for in those documents and minimise or eliminate risk, or as much risk as possible. Our role, I like to think of us as the last guard at the gate that is there to protect the consumer. So we need to know what to look for in a contract, what is standard, what is not, what isn't in that contract that should be, what questions I should be asking in relation to what the client's told me about the property, what I've seen myself by looking at the agent's advertisement of the property, because I never get to see the property. But I believe, and I don't know whether everyone does this, always look at the estate agent's advertisement, because that's when I can see if renovations have been done. That's when I can see if a pool's installed. And get an idea of what's there, so I can then write my legal report accordingly and ask the right questions. So I'm like an insurance policy almost. You could think of me that way when you're buying property.
Right. And so it goes right the way through, from the very early engagement about, hey, I'm thinking of buying this property. So you look at the agent's specifics, maybe. I've always got this worry about those so-called reports that come as part of the marketing program from the real estate agents, because they often don't tell the full story. But also, very importantly, things like presumably thinking about the planning context of the property and those sorts of things. Are there plans to put a road through or anything like that? That would be something that you'd actually think about too, as well as perhaps things like zoning. Is it in a fire or a flood zone? Those sorts of things is stuff you'd probably touch as well, to try and give people the best possible basis to understand what it is they're buying.
Well, each state in Australia has different types of contracts. In New South Wales, there are what are called prescribed documents, which must be attached to a contract for sale for a property being sold. And one of those documents will be the planning certificate. So we would look at the planning certificate as part of our legal review of the contract. Now, if we knew that our client wanted to knock down and rebuild or put an extension in, we would specifically look at the zoning and development controls, or refer them to speak to someone further in relation to what they want to do and whether they'll be allowed to do it on that piece of land, particularly if it's in a heritage control area or on the water in terms of height limitations, maximum use of land space, things like that. So in New South Wales, you'll have those prescribed documents. They must be there. If they are not there and you exchange a contract, a buyer can pull out just for that reason, right up to the day of completion, to the time of completion. So you must make sure that they're all attached. Then you look at to see what else is attached to the contract. Now, therefore, houses and apartments that have already built. Off the plan is another beast entirely. We could probably have a whole episode on that in terms of the horrors of off the plan, because there are so many. But they're the things that you look at, and a good conveyancer will know what should be there, what they should be looking at, even the list of inclusions for the property. The amount of times, I would say 90% of contracts that I review will not have a full list of inclusions, simply because they're either blank altogether because there's been pressure on the vendor's conveyancer or solicitor to get a contract to an agent quickly and they haven't obtained instructions, or they haven't ticked, things that should be there because they haven't got the instructions yet, or they haven't bothered to get instructions yet. They've just whipped together their precedent sale contract and got it out to the agent. I find that frustrating, but I've been doing this a very long time, and the way I do things is the way it was always done, but things are different now due to the speed in which properties go to market, properties are negotiated, properties are being exchanged.
So the risk, of course,
Again,
is...
I guess,
Go on, Edwin.
yeah, I was going to say, Jenny, one of the things that I've come across, and I'm coming across a lot more, and it's been prolific over the last 3 years, more to the point, where the markets have just absolutely gone gangbusters. Our backyard is Sydney, New South Wales, parts of the extended region of Sydney, and there are a number of things that jump out where, obviously, from a buyer's agency point of view, that we hold our clients' hands. We understand the whole process. Also, having spent 18 years in the sales and property management side of things, I understand how that works very well as well. And so now, what we find and what we see is, because of all the emotion that's around, because of the hype of the market, the slower, or sorry, the narrower timeframes that people can do the due diligence, they're relying a lot more on the vendor's reports or the vendor's agent's reports, or the ones that they commission. Now, and this is why we said that I put the show, caveat emptor. Is it really? Is it a myth in 2026? Because having a buyer rely, solely and totally on the vendors' agents' reports, or the ones that they commission, are they really at arm's length? Is one. Secondly, is there's a lot more education that needs to happen around buyers going into properties that have got extensions, that have got major works done to the property, but they don't disclose them to conveyancers. Now, I know that there are two demolition orders on 2 properties in Blacktown, because Blacktown do not do a BSA, or what's otherwise known as a reverse D8, because of the that's just the way Blacktown is. The properties don't comply. Now, I questioned the agents at the time when I was looking at the properties for our clients. The agents were emphatic. They said that the renovations, the extensions were council approved, and this and that and the other. Obviously, we're able to do a lot of this research a lot quicker. We can expedite our due diligence on properties because of the team that's behind us. But a lot of buyers don't have that luxury, and they don't use buyers agents like ourselves. So they're getting caught out. And unfortunately, a lot of conveyancers and solicitors are not being informed of extensions, renovations. Now, it is very much a breath of fresh air to hear you say that you look at at least you look at the listings on the portals for the agents' listings, and it gives you an idea of what may have been done over time. But it's not always, obviously not always going to be able to see if any major works have been done to the property. The other thing there is where, from the conveyance side of things, is that there is this misnomer that just because it was done over 7 years ago, it's still okay. If you don't have an occupation certificate, if you don't have council approval, my fallback position on anything like that is, especially when agents say, look, the renovation was done 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, and the extension was done such and such a time. It doesn't, everything's okay, or the current vendor bought it as is with the extent, but there's no occupation certificate. I say, to my clients, I say, look, you may be okay. They may get along with the neighbours now, but you come and live in the property, and they don't like you. And guess who's going to go and tell the council about the extension? Your neighbour, your new neighbour, because they don't like you, and then you're going to be in a lot of hot water. So how can we bridge that misconception, that ignorance or that communication from a buyer to a conveyancer or a solicitor doing the conveyance to place the buyers in a much better position with regards to the reports that are given out by the agents. I'm talking about the before you buy, before you bid reports that are handed out, and any other report that Mark and I consider them to be nothing more than a marketing, part of the marketing strategy anyway.
Well,
And
it
also,
all comes down to, oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, that's what, I think I've said enough.
It all comes down to the way properties are being sold. And agents are now being told and being taught to sell with speed. And so that is how these pre-purchase inspections came about, being ordered by agents and being provided to buyers, because it speeds up the period between offer and acceptance and exchange. That's what they want. And they want that for the sole reason of once it's exchanged, their commission's guaranteed. Okay. And through that training, they've been taught fear of missing out. So they develop a strategy of, I've got you the contract, I've got you the strata report. They don't tell people, well, I hope they do, that just handing them a copy of a report does not mean the buyer can rely on that report, legally rely on the contents of that report. Now, that's a very important point to remember, because in the contract for sale, it says the purchaser accepts the property as at the date they entered into the contract, not the date of settlement, as at the date they entered into the contract. That's why you get these reports beforehand, to satisfy that. But the problem I have with this is that they are being done by people who are not licensed to do the reports. They're being done by companies that have a relationship with the agent, so we don't know if they're being asked to not disclose something. There's no regulation around these reports. Now, if a purchaser buys the report, they can legally rely on it. And if that report fails to have disclosed something major, then they have a right to sue that inspector. But there needs to be more immediate protection than that.
Yeah, but
And
look, the unfortunate, if I can say, the unfortunate thing is, Jenny, that what we've got now is we've got a system that has allowed a very dangerous liaison relationship between the selling agents and the people that are providing the building and pest reports prior to the auction or during the sale campaign. It's a very, very dangerous relationship. Now, I've also got a background in the building construction renovation side of things, and I know a lot of building inspectors. As a matter of fact, I posted up on LinkedIn, as I think you may have seen last week alone. I had a building inspector tell me that he's being asked to fluff up the building report so that in many parts of Sydney, so that the transaction can be kosher.
I've had that experience so many times. But the problem is that I went out on my own 16 years ago, and even 16 years ago to maybe 10 years ago, we could get an offer and accept it and then go get a pest and building report independently, that I would use my pest and building fellow, who I had been using for 20 years at that point. We'd all have that person, and our client would buy that. Now, we don't have time to do that. They've taken away that time because it's all about speed. It's all about getting the contract exchange and the sale on their record. And there was a whole expose about this in the Herald last year when they were doing weekly sort of comments about conveyancing and the risk to the consumer. And my concern is that the fair trading and government are just not looking at this as a way of finding solutions to give purchasers a better protection in this area. We either have to, there's various things that have been discussed. One has been the vendor attaches a pest and building report or pre-purchase report to the contract, and then it becomes a prescribed document under the contract. So that's something that the vendor is saying that is a correct report and it discloses everything. That has been discussed. That actually happens in the ACT, but it's never moved out of the ACT into the other states. We have a cooling off provisions, and where a purchaser can enter into a contract, pay a cooling off deposit, which is 0.25% of the price, and then complete their due diligence during the cooling off period. And if they can't proceed because something's been picked up in the contract or the pre-purchase report, they can rescind the contract without losing the 10% deposit, but they will lose their cooling off deposit. Now, I find time and time again that selling agents will tell buyers, oh yeah, you'll be able to do all of that. You'll be able to request changes during your cooling off period. Yes, we can do that. But once we've entered into the contract, the vendor has no obligation to agree to one thing we ask. So if there's a fundamental change that we want in a contract, and with Sydney prices, we're talking about cooling off deposits that could be $5,000-$8,000. That's a lot of money to lose because you've entered into a contract without your conveyancer looking at it first. My rule of thumb is I need to look at the contract before you sign it, regardless of whether you enter into a cooling off period. But there's no rule around that. That's just the way I practice.
Look, and you've taken a very cautionary approach and a very diligent approach, which is commendable. With unfortunate, a lot of conveyancers, a lot of conveyancing that I've seen out there. A lot of don't spend a lot of time and don't do half of what you're telling us that you practice does, but which is rather unfortunate, and it puts the purchasers in a very precarious position. Look, currently there's where we're also assisting post purchasers that have come for us to help them because of our other arm of our business in helping them. They're found out by their by the friends that we've assisted them in purchasing properties, that we also help them with the renovations. And I mean, I have read some of these reports that they've relied on, and now they're getting $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 rectification works done to the property. It's not as easy as a lot of people may think, that you can sue the inspector. There are many hurdles that the buyer has to get over before they can be successful.
But then we're also in a position, Edwin, where conveyancers and lawyers will now are starting to become very reluctant to look at pre-purchase inspection reports, and definitely strata reports, because they are a summary of the records in which the strata manager has chosen to give the inspector.
100%.
So we are sort of in a position where if we've been given an hour, which we are quite commonly given, an hour, maybe 2 hours, review a contract, review a strata report, pest and building. Now, some of these reports can be 3,000 pages. We would have to go back and say, I can look at the contract, protect you under the contract for sale, but if you want to exchange in 2 hours, you'll need to satisfy yourself in relation to the strata report or the pest and building. Now, my concern is that my client is thinking all about getting the property before someone else gets it, and doesn't think about what that means. Even though I'll explain that, they don't get what that means, because they're in the world of where they're being told if they don't exchange in the next 2 hours, they've missed out on the property.
So the question
and they're not seeing what the importance is of that due diligence.
So my question is, the maxim always was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. But it sounds to me as though what you're saying, Jenny, is that the structural changes that have happened within the industry means it's now very hard for a buyer to beware. Well, unless they drag their feet and swim against the tide.
Yeah, and look, my role will be to try and slow it down. That is one of the things I need to do. And if I've got a client who trusts me, and I've got a lot of clients that trust me, but I've got a lot of new clients coming in, and particularly first home buyers who have never been in this situation before, all they can think about is, I've got ahead of everyone else. I've had my offer accepted. I've just got to get this done before I lose it. And it doesn't matter whether the sale price is 800,000 or 8 million. I said this recently in a post, I find that people spend more time looking at the form guide for Saturday races than looking at my legal advice. Or the due diligence of a property they're buying.
Yeah.
They just don't get it.
And I guess, Martin, the sad thing also is the fact that what we can say, and perhaps we can agree or maybe disagree, that buyers are relying on the information passed on by agents, whether it be information that they freely give, and therefore they think that the vendor's agent is on the buyer's side. That's one of the misnomers. But also, we also go back to another position there, and that is that, look, from my almost 30 years in the industry, involvement in the industry on both sides of the fence, is that I have seen, heard with my own ears, and watched, and obviously having discussions with colleagues in the industry of what goes on, that there is a lot of information, particularly if it's got to do with material fact, that needs to be disclosed, which isn't disclosed. And unless you've got a conveyancer on the other side, really diligently looking at the contract, and as you said, because of speed, because of time, because of the time constraints with the purchase, or even more to the point, if it's an auction, and the auction campaigns, when I started, the auction campaigns used to run for 6 to 8 weeks. Now we've got auction campaigns running for 3 weeks. And whilst people are being rejected on offers
and
on
a
other
lot off
properties,
market, a lot off market.
yeah. So the auction campaigns, by the time you get to know that there's another property that you could potentially buy because you missed out on the one that you were just negotiating on, you're already 2 weeks into the auction campaign, and the auction's the following week, and people are finding this whole thing. So you're really relying on the honesty of the industry when even it comes to the prescribed documents.
Yeah. Now, don't forget, if you're a buyer, you have no contract with the agent. So if the agent's misled you in any way or has conducted himself in an unconscionable way, you have no agreement to rely on to sue that agent for that. You can sue them under various legislation, for misleading and deceptive conduct or unconscionable conduct, but you don't have a direct agreement with the agent. So you have an agreement with me, you have an agreement with your bank, and your contract for sale, the parties of a contract for sale are the vendor and the purchaser, no one else. So you might have an ability to sue a vendor, but it's after the fact. And if you go down that path, it could be 12 months, 18 months before your case is heard in court. So there are provisions outside of the conveyancing legislation where you can, but this is the point I'm trying to make, is you can't believe everything that you're being told. You've still got to look at it independently and have someone look at it without all that emotion and with experience and knows what to look for if you're wanting to buy. And let's talk about what you're buying here. This is your biggest financial asset. For the majority of people, this is the biggest financial asset that you will have in your life. And you're wanting to buy a property that will increase in capital gain over years, or if you renovate it, you will increase its value, and you're saving towards your retirement, or you're saving to buy an investment property, all of those things. Now, if you then put down this money and you've bought a house that's being eaten alive by termites, or you get a notice served on you because the extensions are legal and it needs to come off, or you've converted the garage into a granny flat which was never approved, that's significant value loss on your property that you purchased. And they're the things you must know. And you need someone who knows those things to ask and look for. So because there just isn't enough protection for the consumer at present under conveyancing, there just isn't. We're managed, and agents are managed by fair trading, and it's just not good enough. It's not good enough. I mean, I acted for a first home buyer. We did 6 contract reviews for her before she actually was able to buy a property. 2 of those contracts that I looked at, the agent told her there was a car space and a storage space, and there wasn't. All I needed to do was look at the strata plan to see that there was no car space and storage space, but he was advertising it as that. And he showed her someone else's car space and storage space. Now, that's a significant decrease in value of the price you've just agreed to buy. Now, if she had someone acting for her who didn't look at that strata plan, she would have found that out after completion. And she's got the right to sue the conveyancer, but she's still left with a unit that she's paid too much for without a car space and storage space, and it'll take quite a while for her to gain that price back in value before she could start seeing a profit on her property or a capital gain on her property. So there was that one. And the other one was he had the address wrong and the lot number wrong. So the contract was for a property that wasn't owned by the vendor. I mean, it's just, and the only reason I picked that up is because one of the standard 101 things that you do in conveyancing is you look at the name of the vendor on the front page against the title search. And if it's not the same, you go, why?
So the question I've got, Edwin, let me just come in. So the question I've got is, we've clearly been talking about some of the real problems that we have here with the way the system works. And I suppose my question forming in my mind is, can this be solved simply by better education, particularly of prospective buyers? Or is there a need for policy reform and changes in the regulation? Because it does sound to me as though this is completely messed up at the moment.
Yeah, it's both, I think, Martin. I think there has to be better education, and that's something I'm definitely wanting to do as part of my platform as president over the next few years. But we are also championing change in regulation and legislation. There has to be more protection of the consumer in conveyancing. There just has to be. There has to be a crackdown on these pre-purchase inspection reports, and there has to be a crackdown in the way properties are being sold. So to allow buyers to complete their due diligence properly and have the comfort that they're entering into a contract that they are protected by, or at least are aware of the risk, and
Jenny,
have priced it accordingly.
I guess in that sense, when we talk about education, I mean, the whole thing about these pre-purchase reports was brought about, in my opinion, and came into vogue when Dominello, the Minister for Innovations in the previous government with the Liberal government, where he pushed the reforms with the industry, and they got a big backlash with regards to underquoting. And this is when then before you bid came into vogue, and everybody started using them. And back then I said we're headed down the wrong path here. What was meant to be an initiative to assist purchasers because of the underquoting issues that we've had ever since I've been in the industry. Since auctions started taking vogue back in 2015, in a little bit earlier in the eastern suburbs, what was meant to be a positive approach to resolving the issue of underquote and people overspending in the due diligence, spending $650, $700, $750, whatever for an independent building inspection report, and so forth. And this is where this came in. But the unfortunate thing is well, I've seen time and time again over the years, over the last 30 years, where the industry that I'm involved in, in the sales and property management, and also the real estate industry, has a way of hijacking good intentions and utilising it against the consumer. So education is one thing, but would it be feasible to put a memo out, if I could put it that way, to the conveyancing fraternity, and say, listen, just don't accept these pre-purchase reports. Tell your clients, do not accept these pre-purchase reports. They may be getting it cheap, but if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, and you're going to end up paying a fortune on the other side.
Yeah, and we will say that as the AIC Institute for Conveyancing, we will say that, but we can't enforce it. We will highly recommend it. We'll give training around it. We'll have produced webinars about it. We'll have conferences speaking about it. But it comes down to also, when you say you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, people value conveyances and the legal aspect of conveyancing according to what we're getting paid to what an agent's getting paid, and they value accordingly. Unfortunately, today, that's what happens. It never used to be that way. No one would have signed a contract, 20 years ago without talking to their conveyancer lawyer first. but they will now look for, and agents will look for conveyancers who will do it for them, where they charge ridiculously low prices and then are never around, are not experienced. And unfortunately, those buyers have a horrendous experience and will never use them again. But again, this is something that I'm trying to push as education to the consumer as well. I say, why on earth would you risk your biggest financial asset on protection of $600? If you're going to buy something valuable, say, what's the for $2 million, are you going to take the insurance out that's got all the little qualifications at $600, or are you going to take the one that covers everything for you? Gives you the peace of mind. So that is an education piece. We've also got to educate buyers to be involved in their purchase, understand what they're buying, understand what the conveyancer is saying to them, because they're not. We find time and time again, they're not even reading what we're sending them. And they just want things done. If we send them paperwork to complete and sign, or declarations to be signed in stamp duty, it's a box to tick, and they're not looking at what they're declaring. So there is definitely education, but there has to be regulation change. And what I have been very frustrated in the past is that they're not asking the conveyancing industry to be involved in those discussions. And where the Law Society might be involved, they're a much bigger, obviously, entity than we are. They're not necessarily doing conveyancing every day. And we see it. We're at the coalface. We see it every day. We see these issues happening. And I could tell you many, many instances outside of what we're talking about tonight where they are at risk. But we've got to be part of the conversation to find the relevant solution for protection. We've got to start looking at outside of the money being made, being by third parties, whether it's the agent, whether it's the pre-purchase inspection companies, whether it's the government with stamp duty. There's got to be more protection at base level. There used to be, because there was you had the time when you had an offer done to complete your due diligence, enter into a contract. That has completely changed.
And that's
Completely
the pressure
changed.
of
And that has to, why couldn't we have a contract? I'm just throwing this out there, where you enter into a cooling off contract, you get it for 5 days. That allows you, and then it goes unconditional, but you don't put any money down. It just allows you to go do your due diligence, but you're obligated to go unconditional at the end of that. So you're not losing any money. It gives you the time that you used to have to be able to complete your due diligence. And the other thing that you've got to remember also is, because conveyancers get paid this and agents get paid this, we have to do 10 times more work to make a living. The average price, say, is $2 million. What's that as a commission? 80 grand, say?
1.7%, the average.
Yeah. And people are asking us to reduce our fees of $2,000. And that's got to change. And
I think there, Jenny, is the fact that there's a misplaced misplaced priority in that they prioritize what the agent is saying and what the agent is telling them,
and that's where
as
we've got to educate
as opposed to what the conveyancer is telling them. And the unfortunate thing is, and desperation and the current market is what's going. Look, I know where. Look, in my headspace, as Martin, and you'll find out more and more about us as we chat more on the show, and we're all about education. And I've got some harebrained ideas, but some of the harebrained ideas and thoughts that Martin and I have talked about over the years, they're being implemented a bit further down the track. But one of my harebrained ideas is that we need to picket the REI New South Wales and get them to push against this pre-inspection reports that are hung on the domain website on the main portals, and because unless you get the push from the industry bodies, whether it's the REIs or whether the REIs, the AECs, the ABCs, or whatever organisation you fancy you belong to, unless you get the support from those bodies, it isn't going to happen. It is not going to happen. So I know, and I say this with all love and respect, because Tim and I have a love-hate relationship. But maybe you need to tap Tim on the shoulder.
I'm on the board of the REI. I'm on the
Sorry?
board of the REI.
Yeah, that's what I know.
REI.
I know. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to
And
tap.
the
Maybe you need to
reason I
tap Tim on the
became,
shoulder.
yeah, no, the whole reason I am on the board of the REI is that I worked on the platform of your industry and my industry are constantly clashing. We need to find ways of working better for the consumer. We are both there for the right reasons, and we are both there for the right reasons of our mutual client. This needs to be better. And we work on it. Then, unfortunately, we've been
Here's a
thrown
hypothetical for
the
you.
AML, but I totally agree with you. I totally agree
Here's a
with you.
hypothetical for you, Jenny. Here's a hypothetical for you. What if conveyancers? I mean, this is just a hypothetical. Martin, go with me on this one. What if the conveyancers upped their ante and started charging $5,000 a conveyance as opposed to $2,000 a conveyance? Do you believe that will change the perception of the purchaser, and they'll respect your position a lot more, and the conveyance, the actual the conveyance itself, they'll pay more attention to it because they're spending.
I would hope so.
They're spending more money.
But we'd have to give education. We will be putting up our prices this year because of this additional work that's coming in with anti-money laundering. There is so much work that we've got to do now in relation to anti-money laundering, but we also have been forced to do additional work for stamping, and surcharge duty and foreign resident capital gains and all of that. And this is where we need to educate. But I dearly would love all of my conveyancers to be charging that kind of money. They deserve it because they are specialists in conveyancing. They work really hard. They do everything the same as what a solicitor does. That needs to be recognised. So yes, that's one of my key goals, is for that to happen. And then, we're not slaving over having 100 active matters at once in order to make a living, and not a living that, a lot of people earn who are in the conveyancing industry, but a living that they can, be proud of. So yeah, totally agree with that. And again, this is all about education, and I'm hoping that I can, work with people and put that out there.
So we're
it's so important.
So I'm gonna push for. I'm gonna support you all the way, and so is Martin, all the way from the UK. We're going to support you in for conveyancers to push up the ante on conveyance. Martin, are you with us on that? And also we're going to back you up to tap Timmy on the shoulder to get more involved with the education. When it comes to a greater support of the personally.
Yeah.
Personally, I would love to see the before you buy, before you bid links come off the main portals, because they are a travesty. It is deception, and and there are many bad actors in the industry. Not everybody in the industry is a bad actor, but unfortunately, we've got a lot of bad actors in our industry, and they've hijacked it well and truly. And this is something that Martin and I have been voicing for many years as to and educating our clientele base, and we believe that it's because of our education over the last 5 years. More to the point, over the last 5 years, it's because of our education that people are now becoming more and more aware of the fact that the auction campaign process does not necessarily favour the vendor as well. It doesn't favour the purchaser, or it doesn't put the purchaser in on an even playing field, and it doesn't benefit the vendor as well. So, I mean, I've gone toe to toe with my colleagues in the industry, both when I was selling. I've gone toe to toe with them as well when I was in doing property sales as to auction campaigns, but now we're seeing it, and hopefully that whole thing turns around. What's your say on that, Martin?
Oh, I think there's huge need for change, and I think the items that we've touched on here this evening are absolutely essential for people to understand. And I always make the point: people spend more time searching out the relative price of a new refrigerator before they buy, relative to the whole process of buying a property. And Jenny, as you said earlier on, the point is, of course, a property is actually a more significant investment. People, I think, are being tricked and trapped along the way. The caveat emptor moniker there is now being somewhat destroyed. But let me just get really practical, intensely practical, Jenny. If you're a prospective first-time buyer and you were thinking that I might want to buy, but I need a conveyancer, what are some of the questions that they should ask a conveyancer before they sign anything? What's the journey look like for them?
Well, they should be saying, what do you do as a conveyancer? Why do I need a conveyancer? And we'll explain why they need that. Then they'll say, and do you act for me all the way through? Or do you stop once it's exchanged? Because some people will get that sort of idea that that's the only thing that has to be done. Once the contract's exchanged, then they just collect the keys 6 weeks later, even if they've got a loan approved, But usually it will start before those essential questions. The first question will be, what's your fee? And do you give a discount? Every time. So if they've been referred to me by a mortgage broker, or a friend, or they're a returning client, they won't ask me that because they've experienced who I am, and that I'm worth whatever I charge. And I don't charge anything more than anyone else that I'm competing with, because I just wouldn't get the work, unfortunately. But it's got nothing to do with my years in the business, my years at Mallisons, my years at Allen Hemsley, like the work I've done. It just, where that in any other world would mean something, in residential conveyancing means nothing at all. They just want to know how quickly you can do it. When can I sign a contract? I'll have agents or buyer's agents, no offence, Edwin, where they'll say, I've just had offer and acceptance. Can you send the 66W certificate through? And I haven't even seen the contract yet. The amount of times that happens, and so they're the things. And so I actually have a precedent now when I send it through, a quote, these are the things that I do. And I learnt this because when I first started, I knew how to do conveyancing like the back of my hand, but I always just had work walk into my office when I was at those two firms. I didn't know how to run a business, so I had to learn how to run a business. And everyone seemed to be offering free contract reviews. And I was too scared not to do that because I thought I was never going to get a client if I didn't offer that. But they're the people that you might give them 2 contract reviews for free, and then they'll go somewhere else. there's no loyalty there. They're just looking at what they can get for nothing. And eventually I stopped doing that, but I flipped the way I worded it and said, I charge you, $350 for a contract review, but this is what you get for that. And I flipped the way to show them the value of it. And I've never had a query about that fee when I send that through. There'll always be some people that just don't want to pay for your service. But when I get those, I'll say, well, do you work for free? Do you go to work every day and work for free? Because, why would I? It's
My
just
question to you,
bizarre the
Jenny, is
way people think. Yeah.
my question. Now we're having a shing dang or whatever you call it. Is what's the most expensive mistake you've seen a buyer make because they've assumed something was covered?
The biggest mistakes I've seen have been more in off the plan, but I have seen an error where they wanted to knock down and rebuild and build a 3-story, mansion with all the things overlooking the harbour, and they didn't get the right advice or even speak to council. Now, we'll give them advice as to what's there in a planning certificate and what our knowledge is, but you still need to speak to a planning expert. You still need to speak to council. And they didn't do that. And so they bought it for land value, but couldn't get what they wanted and ended up having to resell it. So they did end up reselling it, but you've also, if you're going to resell it, you've got to cover the cost of the stamp duty that you paid. You've got an agent's commission now that you've got to cover. So, that's a difficult one. But I've seen some absolute horrors with off the plan.
And let me add this perhaps to that scenario. I'm just outliving here. Don't hit me on the head. And that is, let me guess. The selling agent said, mate, you can build 4 stories here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of another one where I acted for a buyer. The vendor. No, sorry, I'm so sorry. I acted for the vendor. The buyer entered into a contract with us and was selling their property, and the agent told them that it was a development site, and so that the developers would pick it up really quickly, and they based their purchase price on what they were told they'd get for their property. And then when it went to market and developers started looking at the site, it wasn't a development site. It wasn't large enough. It wouldn't have allowed the development that the agent was advertising to be built on the land. So that dropped the price by a couple of $1 million. And those poor purchasers ended up, we were 3 months late in completing, which put enormous pressure on my vendors. They ended up having to sell 2 properties, another investment property they had, and an investment property of their sons, in order to get the money to complete the purchase. And they did end up taking that agent to court. But again, like they believed what the agent said, and the agent didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't understand it. Now, I don't know. One of the issues that I have is the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales is a very good institute. It's works very hard for its agents, but it's not compulsory to be part of it. And as you know, there's a lot of big franchises in real estate agents. They don't join the Real Estate Institute. They do everything themselves in-house. And that's where I find where mistakes are getting made, because they're not relying on things that the Institute are advising them on, or the continuing education that the Institute's providing, or the conferences they're putting on. So that's an issue that I have too. That even comes down to the way they're exchanging contracts now. because they wanted to be in control of the exchange of contracts because of the way they're selling a property, and they'll be selling and exchanging a contract at 11 p.m. at night because that's the way they've decided to sell it. And they don't want to wait around for a conveyancer or a solicitor to do it the next day. So
Let me ask you.
they adopted a way in which they can exchange the contract themselves.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Jenny. Look, I guess we go back to the speed. We go back to the decisions that have to be made quickly. Obviously, I take your point very much so. When you can't give a conveyancer or a solicitor an hour or 2 hours to to look at review a contract and provide a 66W or anything else. But one of the things that we do ask our clients is to ask their conveyancers is that they're going to be acting for them is are they available after hours and even on a Saturday, because if the need arises, we need to call. And the reason why I ask this is because a couple of months ago, or actually a little bit more than a couple of months ago, probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I brought it up on the Rant, where a contract for sale had been changed. This is prior to the auction, had been changed at 8-9 o'clock the night before the day of the auction. So that was on the Friday night. And it was brought to the attention of the potential purchasers in the at the 10:30 auction, just before it when they started announcing it.
That's
Yeah.
just shocking.
Yeah, it is, and I raised it. We weren't acting. We weren't acting for anybody. I was just checking the landscape at the time because one of our clients was looking at was going to be looking at buying in that area, but not this property in particular. But what I see out there now is really a shadow of conveyancing, how the whole conveyancing aspect of the property transaction was being done from when I got brought into the industry. When I got brought into the industry, my licensee in charge, the first thing he said to me was, Edwin, if you want to learn about, if you really want to make an impact or want to be, you want to get into the industry, you want to be involved in this industry, I need you to go, every time we get a potential listing, I need you to go to council and find out everything there is to know about that property, what's happening in the adjoining properties, are there any development potentials happening in the future. I mean, this is the research that we had to do before we took on that listing. I mean, it was full on. Nowadays, it's just let's bring up what the sales history is on the property. Let's see what RP data or CoreLogic or Price Finder says about the price point. Let's inflate that by another 10%. Let's tell the owner that that's all we can get for it, without doing any due diligence. And then you come unstuck like that particular incident that you talked about earlier on, where now they're $2 million short of the actual value of the property. They go out and buy another property on a whim or on the advice of their selling agent. So look, I agree with you. The whole industry has been there has to be a shaking. Are we going to have a reckoning, Jenny? Are we going to have a reckoning? Is there a time where we're going to have a reckoning?
I just think there needs to be more regulation around how properties are sold. If you're going to advertise it for auction, go to auction. Be fair, stop advertising it for auction and then do a blind auction the day before auction and exchange at 9 o'clock at night. Like how do those buyers know there's actual other bidders out there buying? And then we're not available to help them in those last, at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, because we're not contactable at that point. The agents don't work with us at all. They need to tell us what's going on. They need to give us a heads up that they might be selling the property today so that we know that that's going to be coming in. We've got full days every day, And it happened to me last week, 3 o'clock. Oh, we're about to take offer and acceptance on this. We need to exchange by 4 o'clock. Now, we were flat out with settlements and everything, and it was like, well, give me the details. I didn't get the details till 4:30, and then it had to be done straight away. We're not sitting there, in some bubble waiting for this agent to contact us. There needs to be, and this is why I'm on the board of the REI, there needs to be an education both ways on what an agent's required to do, what their obligations are, but also ours, and why we can't do things for them straight away like that. And it's not that we're trying to hold the sale up, it's just that every single client we have is an urgent priority, every single one. Certainly up to exchange, and certainly as we head towards settlement. It's about that education. But I just think there's been a lot of talk about putting a price range, advertising a price range on New South Wales properties like Victoria do. I think that's a good idea. And I think that in Victoria, they show the page of the agency agreement that shows the price guide, so that buyers at least know that that is the legitimate price range in which the vendor's expectation is, because that's what he's been told by the agent. Because, it would have happened to you, Edwin, so many times where you've gone to try and buy a property for a client and they're sort of saying it's a certain price range, and then it ends up being 400,000-500,000 more,
Well,
and those people never had a chance.
The thing is that, I guess from our side of things and our level of expertise is we tell the agents when they're advertising lower than what it is, because look, we've been in the game for a long time. We know how to value property. We know, when agents, and this is one of the things that also came to light in Victoria, and has come to light in Victoria even up to late last year, when VCAT the Victoria Fair Trading Victoria came hard on some agencies because they fluffed those guides, because they choose properties that got sold 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and in, like, let's say in Sydney's markets, when they go out with those guides and they go with
In
the
a
low
hotter
guides.
market.
We're talking. As I say to our clients, I said, look, we know it's being underquoted. Though you still want the property, but this is the real expectation of it. So don't be misguided that you're going to get it for $500,000 than the true
Edwin,
price
there's
point.
so many people, selling agents, buyers agents, conveyancers, that are young, inexperienced, and they don't know that. And they'll go along, and that's part of the education that they're not getting, that you've got through years of experience. So the market, and you've been around long enough, like I have, where we know what to look for. We know what's not right, what's not kosher. And I'm seeing a lot of agents and buyers agents out there with very limited education, selling multi-million-dollar properties or trying to buy them, and don't even know how to exchange a contract, let
That's crazy.
alone
Well, I
know
guess
what to put in a contract.
my final question is, Jenny, is AI going to replace you?
I think eventually, yes, it will. I think it will replace us. It will replace estate agents. It will definitely. At the moment, you still need us, because it will give you a very general idea of the property, but it won't dig deep enough for you as a conveyancer would. But I do think in probably 10 years, we won't be around. Yeah. But I'll be gone by then, Edwin. I'll be gone.
Martin, is AI going to replace you?
Probably so. Jenny, I want to say thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been an absolutely astonishing conversation, and I think there are really important warnings, but also some very important lessons. But my final question to you, Jenny, is, if you are looking for a conveyancer, where is the best place to go look? Is there a list somewhere? Does your institution have a list, or how do people go about it?
You can find a conveyancer on the Institute website. A lot of clients come to me from word of mouth, from referral, and not from an agent. I have got agents that I work with, but I have never actively sought that because word of mouth from clients, from brokers, from buyers agents, from accountants. If they're going to a broker or a bank, they'll check on a recommendation. They look at their website and see what their rating is on Google. There's no sort of rate my conveyancer like there is rate my agent. We would never have one. But definitely Google. You can look at the reviews on Google and get an idea of that. But ask the questions. I would be happy that you ask me 100 questions than no questions. You need to understand what you're entering into, what your risk is before you put all that money down.
It's a really, really good, important point to end on, I think, Jen. I want to say thank you very much for spending time with us this evening.
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we have another conversation down the track. I want to specifically look at these, new properties coming out of the ground, because there is a whole world of pain there that I'm seeing.
There's a
all
lot
over
of pain
the place
there, Martin.
Yeah. So maybe we should have another conversation about that.
Definitely an episode to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Edwin, any last thoughts from you before we let Jenny go and we'll just do the listings?
No. I just I think it'll be, if Jenny's going to go in, if the conveyancing is going to go to AI in 10 years, I think my side of the fence, at least our team, we'll be here for another 15, because they're still not doing the shit that we do.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope there's still some human element to it, because God help our buyers if there isn't.
Absolutely.
100%.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much, and really appreciate it. I'll let you dial off now, and Edwin will just pick up the conversation with regards to the listings. We won't do a full rant because we haven't got time this today to do that now, because, well, we've had some really, really important messages. Just before we get into the listings, though, Edwin, it was an astonishing conversation, wasn't it?
Look, I think it's amazing to see how what you and I have been talking about for half a decade, or a bit over half a decade. There are other actors in the industry, like the conveyancing, the conveyancers, the Conveyancing Association, are looking at the same things that you and I have been looking at. And now that we've bridged, or that we're forming that bridge between conveyancing and what they're discussing in our discussions, I think there's, and I like the point about it, education, which is what you and I are being centered on for all this time, for close to 7 years now, and it's refreshing, very much refreshing to hear what Jenny had to say. All kudos to her. And one of the other things that really resounded with me was experience, and having people with experience in this field, in the different fields of the property industry, is gold. And the unfortunate thing is, which for another topic for another day, but just to highlight where we are, is that we're losing that seasoned experience in the property management arena, and also, as Jenny said, in the sales side of the industry, because there are people, as I call them, actors, coming in that are very much ignorant of the ins and outs. So they're really just ticking boxes, which is not what you need. You need a seasoned professional behind you, an experienced professional.
Spot on, absolutely. Well, let's just look at the numbers. So in Sydney, this is from the domain listing, on the 9th of February, 21,937 properties listed. Jump forward to the 16th, 22,656. So a little bit of a rise. And in fact, your charts are showing, well, quite an interesting trend, Edwin.
Look, there is the numbers here. What the numbers are showing, as we've picked up, is that there's a lot more land envelopes coming on the market. So be wary of the numbers. Yes, the listings of freestanding homes on market have climbed higher than last year, but so have the land envelopes. They're increasing, and that's sort of skewing a little. So we're tracking higher than last year, but keep your eye on the land envelopes for the next few weeks.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at Melbourne briefly. So in Melbourne on the 9th, 29,153, a lot of houses there as well still, up to 29,370 a week later. So again, number of houses climbing. And I'm afraid the Melbourne market is looking more and more wobbly at the moment from what I'm seeing. I've had a couple of one-to-one conversations this week, and people are quite twitchy now with what's happening down there.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see we're only a bees dick away from the 300,000 margin. We're so close to 30,000. We haven't even gone through winter yet, and we're almost at 30,000 listings on market. The other interesting point here is that the land envelopes for sale in Melbourne have retreated, and home sales are increasing, or freestanding home sales or established home sales are increasing, which is, the land envelope sales are increasing in Sydney, but decreasing in Melbourne. What does that tell you? There is no appetite to build. There is just no appetite to build, and there's the mass exodus of the SMEs, tradies, small builders. And next week's show, we'll talk a little bit more as to what's evolving or what's happening there with regards to the building industry come the middle of the year. There's a lot of things happening, and it's going to scare the pants out of builders, and they're going to migrate to other states.
Absolutely. Well, they can go to Brisbane, because there, on the 9th, 2,880 properties listed. A week later, 2,892. So a very, very slight uptick, but there's still a lot of pressure in the Brisbane market. Though interestingly, I am seeing some wobbliness with some properties, particularly at the top end. And interestingly, looking at auctions, well, of course, we had a bit of an uplift this week in terms of auctions. But, don't let the numbers get misreported. Well, they were, of course, majorly misreported in the mainstream media, because when you look at the actual campaigns and listings and comparisons, it's still pretty slow.
Yeah, the confidence is still not there. And that's for sure. And as we've said it before, and I will say it again, and that is people are waking up to the auction, sale by auction campaign, the methodology, when they're expecting to bridge or break new ceilings, new ground. The appetite's really not there. I'm not saying it won't happen later on, but it's just not there. The confidence, the education around the fees and charges, which is one of the videos that you put out over the weekend, highlighted how expensive it is to take properties to market across most of major capital cities around Australia. The competitiveness there, and people have got nowhere. People have got nowhere to go. So as much as you can talk clearance rates up, there's a lot more going on, and that's in the underlying aspect of the auction numbers, and as we've said before, and that is the potential trouble that the industry faces because transactions are just not happening. And when transactions aren't happening, it means that no monies are coming in to the coffers, which means that it's harder to keep the doors open, which we go back to my prediction of 30 to 40% of offices could potentially shut down or merge into bigger offices by the end of 2026.
And you've put the finger on the very important point here, right? Why is it that people are compressing the sales cycles and trying to force people to exchange quickly? It goes back to that same point. Agents are desperate. They're absolutely desperate to try and get a transaction because they are seeing, well, the ground shifting under them. And going right back to our earlier conversation with Jenny, that's one of the reasons why more people are finding themselves under more pressure to exchange much quicker than they should. And it's all part of the same story, isn't it? Very interesting. Let's
look, and Martin, with that thought, you've got two issues that both vendors also have to be aware of, and that is that you're not getting the right result in the sale of your property because you're shortening the campaign and you're not allowing people to do the due diligence, and they will step out, they will step back, they will step to the side, they won't participate in that particular auction. So therefore, you're not going to get the same energy. You're not going to get that competitive edge. And I've seen it. I see it on a weekly basis. We're down in some parts of Sydney. We're down to 2.5 week campaign, and auction on the third Saturday, or they'll even have a midweek auction, which even shortens it down to 2.5 weeks, which is absolutely bonkers when you think about it. If there's so much demand, if you're telling the vendor that the market is hot, that you need to go to auction, and there's so much demand, you're going to be saying, why do you want to sell the property early? Why do you really want to sell the property early? Allow people to do the proper due diligence, get the right competition into in the room, on the property. Let more people fall in love with the property, and then you get a much better result.
Yeah, it's obvious, but we know what's really going on, of course. Let's look briefly at rentals. So in Sydney, on the 9th of February, 10,320. A week later, 9,636, so a drop. In Melbourne, on the 9th, 10,846, 10,498, so another slight fall. And I'm still seeing huge pressure on the rental market at the moment. And I'm still seeing more people being asked to pay more for the existing property they're in, which isn't captured in a lot of the statistics. Well, Edwin, as we come to the end of the show, you've just got a little thought to leave us with.
Look, the thought is really, goes back to you've got to believe that you're in the right place at the right time, and you've got to walk through 2026 believing that. There are going to be many obstacles, and there's going to be a lot of opposition in 2026. No matter what field you're in, and no matter what part of your life you're in, teenager, adolescents, whatever age group you're in. But you've just got to believe that you're in the right place at the right time, and just absorb it. There are so many challenges from as soon as you drive out your front gate, you leave your driveway. The traffic's annoying. It seems like there's more people on the road. There's more people driving slowly. There's more trucks on the road. There's so much pressing against you, and that is just the nature of 2026. And we're going to get a lot more of it from all sides of life. So just take a deep breath, step back, and or get on the ladder and start looking at the world from a higher vantage point, and just realize that you're in the right place at the right time.
So I sometimes say, stop and smell the roses, right? Just don't get so caught up in this maelstrom that's out there. And as you say, you are where you are. And the other point I'd make, Edwin, is that actually the future is still genuinely open. There are still things that people can do to change the trajectory of where they are. So whatever's happened in the past, that's back then. The future's still there. So grasp the opportunity because, well, opportunities do exist.
That's right.
Edwin, thank you so much. Thank you for setting up the conversation with Jenny. Great conversation that was. And we'll have you back next week for a normal rant. See you then. Bye.
Looking forward to it, man. You take care.